You like this cookie?
Well, this cookie's junk.
I like a cookie.
For some unknown reason, Johto is chock full of a bunch of really weak, fully evolved Pokemon, many of which end up being pretty rare. With it being a mandatory encounter that requires beating the Elite Four to respawn, if you're even in a game that can respawn it, that it's no wonder my buddy John, aka Pokemon7, thought Sudowoodo was legendary when he was a kid. Yet Sudowoodo's stats are anything but legendary. I personally think Sunkern should be a first and second route of the game Pokemon found very easily, like Pidgey or Caterpie. It just is not good enough to warrant hunting for. However, it's actually tricky to find, only found during the daytime, which severely cuts down on its accessibility, and then the only pre-league place you can catch it is the National Park. The only other place it's found in Gen 2 is all the way in Kanto, but Gen 4 added it in the Safari Zone. I'll admit Sunflora is not as overwhelmingly weak as some of the other Pokemon we'll discuss in this video, but the fact that it's not any good, yet is only found in a specific place at a specific time of day with only about a 25% encounter rate, that's just too rare for a Pokemon you really should not be using. Now, I could excuse its weakness if it was an early game Pokemon found relatively easily. After all, it's only a bit weaker than Butterfree and Beedrill. However, that is not the case at all. Yanma is only found on Route 35, a route with completely optional grass with the encounter rate of 1%. 1%! Who authorized this? Why would they make a Pokemon with under 400 base stat total that cannot evolve have a 1% encounter rate in one patch of grass that's out of the way? I get it if you want to put a cool Pokemon hidden away like that, but this useless bug type, why would you do that? Once it got its evolution Honchkrow in Gen 4, it became an acceptably strong Pokemon. But prior to that, Murkrow was an unacceptably weak, fully evolved Pokemon. But what upsets me the most about Murkrow is not that its encounter rate doesn't get above 35%, or that it's only found at night on 2 routes. It's the fact that those 2 routes are in the freaking Kanto region, which means this super weak Pokemon is only found after you've become the champion? I will never understand the frankly terrible balancing of the Johto games. So many of the new Johto Pokemon are only in the Kanto region after you beat the Pokemon League. And that region is full of really low-level Pokemon, which makes no sense since you're already the champion and have a team that's around level 50. Plus, the level curves for the gym leaders are weird. The whole thing's a mess. I definitely see why they created Mismagius, but I have to acknowledge that Mischievous isn't as weak as the other Pokemon we've discussed so far. In fact, it's the strongest one we've discussed so far. However, I still need to cover it because this underwhelming Pokemon is one of the last Pokemon you find in the entire game. It is insane that the Gen 2 games only added 1 new ghost type that was underwhelming, but it's even more insane that they put that underwhelming ghost type at the butt end of the game. Now, Wobbuffet is a pretty iconic Pokemon, but that's mainly due to its role in the anime. If it didn't have a big role in the anime, then no one would really talk about it aside from when it shadow tag traps you in Nuzlocke and kills at least one of your team members, and it's just awful. It's a gimmick Pokemon with little practical battle use. Kinda like Ditto. Ditto is a bit better once it got the imposter ability, but prior to that, its only role was to transform into the enemy Pokemon, or should I say, a worse version of the enemy Pokemon, because it keeps Ditto's poor HP and only gets 5 PP for each of the moves. But Ditto can be found all over the place in Kanto and has the out-of-battle usage of breeding. Meanwhile, Wobbuffet has the same or less battle usage than Ditto and has no use outside of battle. Yet, it's far rarer than Ditto. In all of the Johto games though, but especially Gen 2, I think Wobbuffet is far too rare for a Pokemon that is just a gimmick and is useless 99% of the time. Too many Johto Pokemon that are not any good depend on outbreaks. Delibird has the 4th lowest base stat total and has no gimmicks whatsoever. It's just garbage. With an inexcusable base stat total of only 330, lower than Tentacool, no one should ever be using a Delibird for any reason. And yet, this useless Pokemon is only found in the Ice Path in Johto. Its encounter rate isn't awful, being 20% in Silver and Soul Silver, and 40% only at Night and Crystal, but that's still not good enough to justify it. But what really upsets me about Delibird is that it's a version exclusive. Why would you make anyone ever have to trade for this thing? A Pokemon that should be found very easily in the early routes of the game. And also its catch rate is only 45, which is the same as Dragonite? Johto has a lot of weak Pokemon that are hard to find. Delibird is not as hard to find as a lot of the other Pokemon I've talked about, but it's so mind-bogglingly weak that anything other than easy to find in every Johto game is unacceptable to me. Honestly, you know what? I'm gonna say it. Pokemon would be better if Delibird did not exist. While not the oldest group of Pokemon, it is still over 2 decades old. And it's a group somewhat infamous for having too many underpowered Pokemon. Unlike Snorlax, Sudowoodo sucks. It's insane to me that they gave Sudowoodo a baby form when it was already so weak and needed a power boost. Snorlax got a baby, but that makes sense because it's way stronger. And then it went on to get a Gigantamax form. As I've mentioned, Johto is filled to the brim with preposterously weak fully evolved Pokemon. Like, they've fixed a lot of them in the 7 generations since, but there are still some that they've neglected to buff.
And speaking of gold, how about Pokemon Gold and Silver? One of the more polarizing entries in the series. For a long time, it seemed like Gold and Silver were beloved, flawless Pokemon games among the community. I've noticed in the last year or so a shift in the perception of Gold and Silver, with the most common issue I see thrown around being the level gaps. While this is an issue for Gold and Silver, you might think surely they'd fix it with Pokemon Crystal version, right? All they have to do is lower Jasmine's Pokemon a few levels, then increase the levels of Team Rocket and their HQ and Price's gym a bit too, but no, they didn't do that and they just left it the same. While you can argue that the biggest issue with Crystal is just the level gaps like it was with Pokemon Gold and Silver, I want to highlight another issue with Crystal that the original game share as well, which seems to be much easier to fix. Like with every new generation, new Pokemon are introduced. Generation 2 introduced 100 brand new Pokemon, but for some reason you can only get some of them in Kanto or super late in the game in Johto. Many of the Pokemon you'd find while collecting all 8 gym badges are just Kanto Pokemon, so I don't know why so many new Pokemon are locked until late in the game, or why they're even in the post-game. Why is Houndour, a Generation 2 Johto Pokemon, only found on Route 7, which is in Kanto version in Crystal? The same goes for Slugma and Murkrow, despite Murkrow being featured by some of the Team Rocket admins. Then there's other Pokemon, like Gligar, Skarmory, and Sneasel, that are only found super late in the game, meaning you'll have a harder time getting Generation 2 Pokemon in a Generation 2 game. I don't see people talk about this issue as much as the level gap issue, but I think it's equally as bad for Gold, Silver, and Crystal. Now for another remake game, Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Seeing how Platinum released right before them and Platinum fixed the gym order issue that Diamond and Pearl had, maybe Heart Gold and Soul Silver will do the same for Crystal version. Well, no, they didn't. The Johto gym leaders still have the same Pokemon with the same levels from the original Gold and Silver games. The biggest issue I have with them is that they didn't do much to improve upon Crystal version outside of incorporating new mechanics like abilities. This would have been a great time for them to change around the gym levels, especially since they added some new Team Rocket executives in Team Rocket battles, but overall I still say that Heart Gold and Soul Silver are just improvements upon Crystal. We just have to nitpick and find some issues for the sake of this video. And although Platinum isn't technically a remake game and Heart Gold and Soul Silver is, I still would have liked to see if Heart Gold and Soul Silver incorporated some of the things that Platinum did to Diamond and Pearl, like of course changing around the gym order.
This game is bad! This is a bad fucking game.